Didn't grow out enough, well, you cut it back too much. So plants that are at a size that you like them, whether it's Pittosporum or Burford Holly or... No. Sadly, I don't think it'll last very long, but maybe it'll come back tonight. But anyway, the secret with mature shrubs, be it your xylosma, somebody was asking about xylosma, or Pittosporum, or viburnum, or whatever, when you prune those things, cut off 1 year's worth of growth. And that's how much you want to prune on them every year. A slow-growing plant, you may only prune every other year. And then what you want to do is cut off about 2 seasons worth of growth. The thing that you don't want to do is just cut off a little bit and then come back and cut it again later and then come back and cut it again. You shouldn't have to prune a plant 4 times a year unless you're doing something totally different, which is what we call shearing. If you want that perfectly square hedge, that's shearing, that's not pruning. And that's a whole nother story. But pruning, you really shouldn't have to prune more than once a year. So we're going to cut off 1 year's worth of growth. It's as simple as that. And you can look down at a plant that's been pruned. Just get out there and search through the plant. And you'll be amazed how easy it is to tell how much that plant grew in a year's time. And that's going to give you your best indication of how much to cut it back. Now, there are special cases, and it could be an overgrown tree, or it could be a tree that's bigger than you want it to be, like a pecan tree, or it could be your crepe myrtle. And the worst thing that you can do with a plant like an ash tree, I mean, if you're going to dehorn, or what do they do called topping a tree, just go ahead and cut it off at the ground level and get it over with, because you're going to ruin the tree anyway. But if it's a big tree that simply needs to be reduced in size, or if it's your crepe myrtle that has grown bigger than you want it to be, and you're going to cut it back, you don't go in and just cut at a random point on that plant, or it'll look like you live in Houston. You drive around Houston, you'll see more murdered crepe myrtles than you can believe. They have this stem that comes up, and then they have this whole bird's nest of growth. They cut at a random point, that little hormone moved up the stem, and they made 15 branches right at that one spot. So how are we going to reduce the size of a crepe myrtle that we want to make a little smaller? Well, first of all, remember, crepe myrtles choose the right size when you first plant them. We've got dwarfs that grow 3 feet tall, miniatures that grow 3 feet tall, dwarfs that grow 6 to 10 feet tall, and standards that grow 30 feet tall. If you've got a Basham's Party Pink, a standard that grows 30 feet, you're never going to make a 6-foot plant out of it. So just give up and replace it, move it somewhere else. But you've got a crepe myrtle that has gotten a little too big and you want to reduce the size. You've got this tall stem. Follow that stem back down to where there's another branch coming off. In the case of that pecan tree with a limb you want to get rid of, follow that limb back to where there is already a smaller branch coming off that is pointing the direction you would like it to grow, and cut just above that point. So what's going to happen? When we've got our hormone that's making the buds pop, starts up the stem, and all of a sudden it's all diverted into this stem that's going out to the side. It might cause 1 or 2 little buds to break at that point. But what it's going to do is force the plant to put its growth into that alternative limb that's coming out that way. So you want to cut, in that case, just above a limb that's already growing a shape in a direction that you want it to grow. Do you see the difference in what it would be in cutting just at a random point and having 15 things come out, and cutting just below a limb that's facing the right way?
Just above.
Yes.
Just above.
Yeah, just above that. I'm sorry. Yeah, just above that, and then the stem that's just below will come out and begin to grow. Now, you can do some cosmetic things. In the case of a crepe myrtle, early in the year, I like to cut the old blooms off, because a plant, I mean, the purpose of flowers in plants is to produce seed. It's not to impress us with beautiful flowers. The reason that plants bloom is to make seed. That's what flowers are there for. The reason the flowers are colorful is to draw the bees or the flies or the hummingbirds or moths or whatever the pollinator is. Color in plants is designed to attract the pollinator. That's what fragrance is all about. Yeah, I know. You think, well, these things were created for us for our pleasure. We've adapted them because we enjoy them. But flowers are to make seed. And a plant, if it's a plant that has the potential to bloom more than once, if it's a plant that's blooming on new wood, if you just leave the flowers, the plant is then going to put all of its energy into making seeds. If you cut the flowers as they fade, the plant's going to say, oh, I know that took my flowers away, I better bloom and make some seed time around. And you can encourage reblooming in many plants, cutting them off before they go to seed. Just cut it below where the old flower plays in the season when your grape myrtle's not going to put on a bunch of new blooms. Leave those seed heads. It's great food for the birds through the winter months. That's pretty much dead tissue. If you ever follow some of a grape myrtle up, you'll find it's nice green wood up to a certain point. Then it's just brown dead wood. Which, again, your tree wood's not going to influence the growth of the plant at all. Now, in the case of things like grape myrtles, in the case of things like locust, in the case like trees, you can have your choice as to whether you have a tree form or whether you have a bushy plant. The natural nature of something like a grape myrtle is to grow a big tall bush. If you want it to be more tree-like, you prune out all of the little growths coming out except for 2 or 3 or 4 trunks that you're going to let go off and make major trunks. I do not like grape myrtles that are pruned as a one-trunk tree. And the reason is the grape myrtle is super strong. If you grow this with one trunk, it's got this big top on it, and we get a thunderstorm, you may have nothing about all the time. If you let it grow 4 trunks out of there, and you wouldn't even know it. So I like to see crepe myrtles pruned. If you're going to grow them as a tree, I like to see them pruned as a multi-trunk tree. But I've also seen crepe myrtles across the street from my grandparents' flower shop in Dallas. There was one that my grandmother used to call the giant bouquet. That crepe myrtle was about 25 feet tall, probably had 50 stems, and in the middle of the summer, it was just a solid mass of flowers. You couldn't see anything but flowers, and it was a gorgeous plant. But whether you make a crepe myrtle or a bay or something like that, tree form or bush form, it's all depending on how you prune it. There is not one particular crepe myrtle that's grown because it makes a tree, and another one that's grown because it makes a bush.
So do you just give up on the one that's already big like that in the bouquet?
If you wanted to make it tree-like, probably so. But you could, if you wanted to, even on a big plant, go through and trim out all except 2 or 3 trunks, and they would gradually get bigger and bigger. Crepe myrtles are sort of a special case, because if you've got a really, really old one, they ship much earlier. I mean, the old one used to be called red. When you compare, it's the 1st of June, and, oh, my myrtles are full bloom, and mine never blooms till August. There's nothing wrong with your care. It's awesome. They have gone through some field myrtles and go in, and you have 2 or 3 that always bloom early every year. Go in and they'll propagate from those because the factors including day length and a lot of other things that determine plants bloom. But we have wonderful selection of crepe myrtles that bloom 6 weeks earlier than old-fashioned ones used to. We have crepe myrtles that the old-fashioned ones make a cluster of blooms big around. The ones make a cluster of blooms about this big around. That really doesn't have anything to do with care. That has to do with genetics. And those plants have been selected because of their blooming time and their blooming habit. So if you've got a really old crepe myrtle and you think you want to change the shape of it, you probably change the shape of it with a chainsaw and plant it next to it without forgetting making a tree or whatever. Okay. Let's see. What else do I want to cover as far as just general? Young trees are a case. Do I have a young tree right here? No, I probably don't. You obviously want a tree to have a trunk. One of the misconceptions about limbs is that limb that's 2 feet off the ground is as the trunk grows. It's going to push that limb higher and higher, right? That limb's 2 feet off the ground now. It's always going to be 2 feet off. So do we want to cut all off of a young tree as it grows? Well, yes and no. The problem is these nice little green leaves that we were talking about absorbing all that energy. Every leaf is a little sugar factory. And every leaf that's along the trunk of that tree is pumping sugars back into the trunk and is making the trunk grow and increase in strength and diameter at the point near where that leaf is. So if you take a young tree and you keep cutting all the limbs off of it, you're going to get a tall, skinny tree with a very, very weak trunk that's going to take a long time to ever develop into very much. But on the other hand, you don't want a tree with a bunch of limbs 2 feet off the ground that you're going to bust your head on or whatever else on whenever you go around. So what we do is we compromise. On a young tree, go through every year. I like to do it in the winter when the leaves are off of most of them. And all those little side limbs up and down, cut them back to about 6 inches long. Now what happens where you cut them back to 6 inches long? It's going to put on a nice tuft of leaves. The nurserymen have a very technical term for that. We call it trashy trunk. And I love to see a young tree that's just a solid mass of little short limbs with leaves all the way up and down the trunk. And then leave the upper limbs that you want to develop as scaffold limbs. But the lower branches coming out on the tree, just cut them back, but don't cut them off. And do this every year until that trunk gets up to where it's 5 or 6 inches in diameter, until the trunk's really up pretty good sized and pretty strong. And then cut that limb all the way off. But as a young tree, having leaves all the way up and down the trunk is going to make the thickest, strongest, best trunk you will ever get on a tree. Then when they get up to, like I say, where they already have a strong trunk, you can take that limb all the way off. When you look at the point that a branch comes out on a trunk, you'll see an interesting thing. You'll see sort of a little roll of tissue, and then you'll see the limb coming out from that point.